Thank you very much. My friends, we're living in a complex moment in history, and every one of us has a leadership role to play. And let's develop that idea. We'll have just 20 minutes to do it, and I want to start by inviting us to take a little survey. A few years ago, a company asked people if they had a great deal of confidence in the leadership of society. Let's duplicate the survey right now. If you have a great deal of confidence in our political leaders, please raise your hand. Hello? Is the microphone working? Okay, you have a great deal of confidence in our business leaders. Why don't you raise your hand? Okay, we're up to like 6%. How about education leaders? Please raise your hand. And finally, religious leaders, please raise your hand. Oh my. You're very pessimistic people here in Portugal. I'm from New York City. We're very optimistic people where I come from. Maybe you heard someone from New York City right now is in the process of making America great again. Maybe you heard about that. So let me show you what was the correct answer to the survey. And look, my friends, in the bottom right corner, this is 2007, when the world was still okay, before the crisis. So we can imagine if this survey were done again today, all of these numbers surely would be lower, huh? So what would be better? What would be better? I want to invite us to take 5 quiet seconds to think about 2 questions. Please think of the names of 1 or 2 living people that you would consider to be good leaders. And why do you think of this name? So what are some of the personal qualities or attributes that you associate with a good leader? So who are leaders? I'm sure people are thinking of very interesting names. Cristiano Ronaldo, probably a few people are thinking. I wonder who's thinking about their own name. I guess nobody next to nobody. We live in a culture that teaches us to be modest people, and modesty is a beautiful and important virtue, essential to good leadership. But when it comes to leadership, your modesty is somehow misplaced because we walk around with a broken stereotype about what leadership actually is. In other words, when I say think of the names of leaders, it's natural that we all think of super famous people. And that way of thinking is not the solution to any problems in your families, whatever is your company, in Portugal, in the United States. In fact, it's part of the problem. And the first people we need to think about as leaders I will develop are ourselves. And how do good leaders motivate the team and franchise the team? That was the second question. And I'm sure people thought of wonderful ideas. I wonder if anybody thought of this idea articulated by an effective leader in the US. He said this: you must love those you lead before you can be an effective leader. I just quoted General Eric Shinseki. Until a few years ago, this guy was the highest-ranking military officer in the United States. And first it struck me as strange, coming from a military class, that we tend to associate with macho, being tough, or maybe not so out of place. Because the more I thought about it, the more I suspect generals make better choices. If they love the people they must place into difficulty. And I guess soldiers perform better if they believe that the people who send them into difficulty actually care about them. Now, the general did not talk about leadership primarily as involving hierarchy, authority, giving orders. And that's how I begin to justify my point that everybody here has a leadership role. Because we all thought about famous people, but when you were thinking about the qualities or attributes of good leadership, I bet that the ideas people were thinking of were ideas like courage, integrity, honor, sense of compassion, caring about the team, listens, communicates well? Probably 90% of the ideas you thought of are ideas that you and everyone in your team could role model tomorrow. Here's another way that I justify my idea that we each have a leadership role. If you look in the dictionary, one of the definitions of leadership you find will be this one: to point out a way, direction, or goal, and to influence others toward it. And isn't it true that everybody in this room is doing those words all the time? We're not literally pointing the way with a sign, huh? But implicitly, we're pointing the way every day by virtue of how hard we work, how lazy we are, whether we work with integrity, how we treat the people on the team. We're pointing out a way. This is the way human beings should operate in a group. And we're having some influence. And every one of us in this room has parents, and many of us in this room are parents. Could there be any more obvious example of pointing away and influencing others than what parents do for kids in a lifetime? So good parenting, that's good leadership. Now, though all of us lead, by definition, most of us do so only subconsciously, and I want to encourage us all to be a little more explicit about the opportunities life is giving us to lead in life and in work. And I also want to tell you that your leadership job has become much more difficult and much more essential in the moment in which we're living, and let me develop that point. I'll skip a bit. Let me develop that point by inviting another little survey. Let's think about the world today, the world 10, 15 years ago. If you think that the world today is faster paced, please raise your hand. Oh, now I see everyone's hands. You think that the world is more complex, raise your hand. You think that in the course of managing your life or an organization, you must make more decisions and cope with more change. Why don't you raise your hand? Everybody. The military has an image, an acronym for the world in which we all live, where we're all convinced, too complex, too fast changing, too difficult. The military tells us that we're living in a world of VUCA. It's volatile, it's uncertain, it's complex, it's ambiguous. And leadership is, on the one hand, essential in times of VUCA, because the first most natural thing people want to know is, where are we going? Sense of direction, huh? And that's very hard to determine in these environments. And also, leadership is much more difficult because whether it's your family, your team, your whole company, having some idea of where we head in this chaos is really, really hard. And therefore, because we cannot always say with great certainty, this is where we need to go for the next 3 years, we need to get better at many of the other skills involved in good leadership in order to keep people with us despite uncertainty and complexity. And I'm developing the idea that many of those other skills are deeply spiritual. And management consultants McKinsey actually helped me to make their point. They don't know it, but they are. They did a survey of some of the skills of effective leaders nowadays, a survey of over 2,000 of their corporate clients. And I'm going to show you a subset of about half of the ideas on that list. And have a look at them. Be supportive, develop others, develop and share collective mission, mutual respect, give praise, motivate, bring out the best, recover positively from failures, role model organizational values, seek different perspectives. My friends, you cannot count those ideas, you cannot touch them, you cannot buy them, you cannot put them on a balance sheet. They're not material, they're spiritual. But every one of us knows that companies that do not have this don't do well. And companies where these kind of values are present do well. Now, I want to tell you one story about this idea of leadership in action, this idea where people appreciate that leadership is somehow fundamentally a spiritual endeavor. And the story I want to tell you is a story about doing the laundry. And it's a story about Jorge Bergoglio. A few of you may know him by another name, Pope Francis. I couldn't find a picture of Pope Francis doing the laundry, so this is the picture we use, huh? 30 years ago, Bergoglio was in charge of a seminary of the Jesuits in Buenos Aires that was in horrible financial condition. And he had a meeting of the seminarians, and he said, okay, my friends, we're in bad shape. We can no longer afford to pay people money to come and clean up the hallways and do our dishes. We must do all these tasks ourselves. And he said, I will do the laundry. That will be my job. And in those days, if you got up at 5:30 in the morning and went through the basement of that big building, you would see Bergoglio throwing people's dirty underwear into a big industrial washing machine. The reason I tell you the story is the people who told me the story were not answering my question, tell me something that will make me believe this guy was nice. The question I asked was, tell me something about this guy as a leader. And in some ways, it was a strange answer. They didn't talk about strategy, solving problems, having meetings. He did the laundry. But when I heard the story, what went through my mind was a definition of leadership that the US Air Force uses, as if they were channeling it. I'll show it to you, and then I'll develop one takeaway from that story for all of us here. So the Air Force says leadership is the art of influencing and directing people in such a way they'll win their obedience, confidence, respect, and cooperation. I think what these guys were saying to me, in a way, without having these words, what they were saying was, you know something? In a world where people with power often use power to exempt themselves from the sacrifices and hard work and discipline they ask of everyone else, Bergoglio says, we have to sacrifice, I go first. And that won my respect, to use this idea. It made me want to be on the guy's team. And so one lesson learned that I give you from this doing the laundry story is maybe all of us could go home and think about the environments in which we lead. First, our families, our community, the team we have at work, our whole company, and do a little audit. How are we winning people's confidence and respect and cooperation? And we do that all kinds of ways. Some of the ways we do that, maybe AI or robots will help us with, giving us data to help us be better informed about what we're doing. But frankly, some of the ways that we win people's respect and confidence, AI will never help us with. In other words, like Bergoglio, to convince the people on your team that you care not only for your own success, ambition, getting ahead, but you also care about their future, their career, their potential, their flourishing. This spiritual idea that leadership is not about me, I'm here for something bigger than me. I want to share 2 quotes with you to help us imagine how we might put this abstract idea into day-to-day practice in our organizations. The first comes from a football coach. You know, we also play football in the United States. You may know that, huh? Except you guys use the wrong size ball. We use the correct ball. And the coach of the team in Pittsburgh was once asked about his philosophy, his concept of what was his job. And look what he says. Every day when I go to work, I think about the things I can do to make my team successful. So I have a servant's mentality in terms of how I approach my job. And I promise you, wherever you work, you get every manager driving into work with this on his mind or her mind. How do I make the team successful? You're going to do very, very well. Let me share another quote. Very different language, but the same idea that somehow my job is to support the team, and that's the way we accomplish the mission together. So I'm somehow serving them. This one is a quote from Sheryl Sandberg on Facebook. You know, once upon a time, we all admired Facebook. That was 6 months ago, but it's a good quote, so I keep it. Look what she says. Leadership is about making others better as a result of your presence and making that impact last in your absence. How about if at our funeral as managers, people could stand up and say this, you know something? She made me better when I worked for her. And you know something? Even after she was transferred, I'm still a better performer. Some of how we lead well has to do with behaviors, the things we do, but some of leading well also has to do with the way we think. And so I want to share with you a really simple tool that will help each of us to stay on track and do well every day as leaders. Every day, just as Niki Lauda used to take pit stops, every day we all have to take a small mental pit stop. So let's imagine at the end of lunch, I have 5 minutes. Or at the end of the workday, I have a few minutes. And no telephone, no music, no nothing, just me. And for 2 or 3 minutes, I'm going to do 3 simple tasks. One, I'm going to remind myself, why am I grateful as a person? We spend our whole life thinking about to-do lists, problems. For a few seconds, why am I grateful? And anybody who reads psychology knows that gratitude correlates very well with productivity, health, happiness. Second, I'm going to lift my horizon a bit. When I say lift my horizon, I mean this, that our horizon tends to be like that. This is the text I must answer now. This is what I want for lunch. Instead of living that way, for a few seconds, let me think, why am I here on earth anyway? Why did I take the job in this company? And then third, let me go back through the last few minutes, let me go back through the last few hours of my day, the meetings I was in, the problems I had to deal with, and try to take away some little lesson that might help me in the next few hours. So I was irritated and distracted all morning. I lash out at him. He had nothing to do with it. Let me process that now and get back in the game. Or I say something dangerous. If we're spiritual people, maybe we go back over the last few hours and try to imagine how God or our sense of a higher power was present to us during the day so far. I think the genius of this very simple practice becomes obvious when we think about the world we're living in. We're all floating along on this river of email, meeting, text, distraction, phone call. And I'm 100% present to every crazy, random, miscellaneous, insignificant distraction that crosses my radar. What I'm not present to are the only things that ultimately is important. What's going on inside me in a deep way, and what's my sense of purpose, and how do I feel like I'm doing? And here's a very simple tool that helps us to keep ourselves on track every day. Let me begin to sum up. I don't have much time. First, I share a little practical takeaways, how each of us can improve our leadership practice every day. Remind yourself every day you have a leadership opportunity and responsibility. And remember the definition that I shared with you, Leadership has something to do with pointing the way and influencing others. So when I get up in the morning, do I have a good sense of direction for myself? And if I have a team, do I help them have a good sense of direction? And take your breaks every day, Take a couple of minutes to be grateful and to review your day so far. And finally, remind your team members that they also are pointing out the way. They're living or not living the values you care about. I share one last idea, and then I'll be finished. I'll let you read a quote from Nelson Mandela, then I comment on it. My friends, most of you I could see are too young, but I remember when this guy came out of jail. And I remember watching him those months and thinking, holy cow. I mean, this guy has the whole package, all of the charisma, all the courage, everything I wish I had. And then many years later, I saw this quote. As if he's saying to me, sorry, Chris, that's not an excuse. Because I was also afraid. I'm Mandela. And let me tell you something. I've had the privilege to work with a lot of very successful people. And I don't know all their stories, but where I do know people's stories, I tell you this. Everybody's afraid. And nobody has enough self-confidence. The people with enough self-confidence are the narcissists. And they're not the solution here, as we're rapidly discovering, at least where I come from. We tend to have this idea that I'll go to some seminar and then the next morning I will wake up with all the confidence and courage I wish I had, and I'm here to tell you it doesn't work like that, you know? And to me, part of leadership is to wake up and understand that despite my baggage, despite my issues, despite my fears, despite my problems, I also have some talents, I also have some wisdom, I've learned things over the year, I also have some skill, and to end where I began, I'm willing to honor the fact that in a complex world, I too have somehow some calling to lead as best I can in the circumstances that life gives me. So thank you very much for listening, and I wish you the best.